Hi again, Mark here from TalkingBass.net. A few months ago I released a video lesson showing how you can create a funky bass line working around the bass drum pattern of a drum beat and using the notes of a chord. So I used the popular James Brown funky drummer beat and a D7 chord, so the notes of the D7 arpeggio. In this lesson I'm going to expand on that lesson by showing how you can apply scale notes in your bass lines. The lesson material for this video is available to download from TalkingBass.net. Just follow the link in the info below. There's a PDF containing the sheet music and tab for everything covered. And while you're over there, check out the rest of the lessons on the lesson map, where everything is organised in categories for ease of navigation. You can also subscribe for free to gain access to the members area, where you can download a whole load of free ebooks, practice tracks and access the forum. So go check it out. So the bass line that I used in the previous lesson sounded like this. Okay, so that bass line used only the notes of the D7 arpeggio, which sounds like this. Okay, so they're the notes of the D7 arpeggio. And if you want to know how I did that, you know, how we came up with the rhythm, how we used those notes, just check out that previous lesson, okay? So I've put a link in the info below, so go check that out first if you want to know anything about that. In this lesson, I'm going to work around an E7 arpeggio, and the bass line is going to sound like this. So this bass line is working around an E7 chord, and even though we don't have a chord playing there, it doesn't matter. If we wanted to play with a band, the guitarist or keyboards or whatever, it would be playing an E7. The chord tones, the notes of the chord or the arpeggio, should always be the framework that you work around, because that's the landscape of the tune, the harmonic landscape. We can play something that sits well with the chord tones, or we can play notes that rub up against it and cause tension. But the reason the notes sound the way that they do is because of the harmony. As bass players, our functional role is to act as the connection between the rhythm and the harmony. So we want to outline the chord progression while locking in with that drummer and reinforcing the necessary accents in the rhythm. So let's have a look at the notes of that E7 chord. So this is going to be the E7 arpeggio. Just in case you didn't know, an arpeggio is simply the notes of a chord played one note at a time. So when we play an E7 arpeggio, we're playing the notes of the E7 chord, okay? So we'll begin with the E, there at the 7th fret of the A string, and then we work through the notes E, G sharp, B, D, and E. Okay, so we work up to the octave there. So we've got E, 7th fret of the A string, then G sharp, 6th fret of the D string, then B, 9th fret of the D string, and then D, 7th fret of the G string, and finally E, 9th fret of the G string. So that's a simple 1 octave E7 arpeggio. So it's an E dominant 7. So whenever you see the chord symbol E7 or A7 or D7, it's a dominant 7 chord. That's what it's called. And if you need any information on any of that, I've got plenty of lessons over at TalkingBass.net. Just work through the Music Theory for Bass series. So that's the E7 arpeggio in 1 octave. And if you were to play all those notes, all of those 4 notes on a piano all together, you'd hear an E7 chord. Now, you don't need to just play it up and down in that 1 octave. You can play them wherever you want, those notes. So to make it a little bit more interesting in terms of a bass line, let's go below that E. So we'll just take those notes, E, D, B, G sharp, and play them below that E. So we can come down on the E, so we'll play with the 4th finger there for the E, 7th fret of the A string, and then we'll play the D, 5th fret of the A string, so that's that flat 7 that we played up there. Then come down to the B with the 4th finger, so that's going to be the 7th fret of the E string, so play that with the 4th finger. And then the G sharp, 4th fret of the E string, and then we can finally come down to the open E. So that gives us quite a few notes to play with. So coming down from the top, so you can see there that all I've done is taken that pattern, I've taken those top 4 notes and played them an octave lower. And that's given us all of those notes to play with. So if I was to play from the open E upwards, E, G sharp, B, D, E, G sharp, B, D, E. So that's a 2-octave E7 arpeggio. Okay, and that's going to be the framework we're going to be working around. As I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at how we can add some scale notes into our bass lines. So next, we need to have a look at what scale we can use with that chord. So in case you didn't know, the most common scale that we use over a dominant 7 chord, like the E7, is the Mixolydian scale. The Mixolydian scale is one of those modes that you might have heard about, but don't worry about any of that stuff for now. All you need to know is that it's just a major scale with a flattened 7th degree. So, if we start at that E again, 7th fret of the A string, and we just work up through an E major scale, when we get to the 7th note, we want to just flatten it, okay? So, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp. And instead of the D sharp, we play the D natural. There's that flattened 7th. Okay, so if you know your major scale, it's very simple to, very easy to play a Mixolydian because you just flatten that 7th. Okay, and if you need to know the individual notes in there, the frets, it's 7th fret, 9th fret on the A string, then we move to the D string and we play 6th fret, 7th fret, 9th fret, then we move up onto the G string, 6th fret, 7th fret, 9th fret. Okay, so E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D natural, E. Play that up and down. As an exercise, it's worth playing up and down through that scale and then up and down through the arpeggio just to see how they relate to each other. So let's try working up and down through the Mixolydian. And then when you get down to there, play it up and down through the E7 arpeggio. Okay, so the whole thing. Okay, and when you do that, you can see how the notes of that arpeggio are there within that scale. Okay, so we have the E, then we have that 3rd there, then that 5th, and then that flat 7th. Okay, and that's why that Mixolydian works over that chord, because the notes of the E7 chord are there in the Mixolydian. Now, to make that scale a little bit more useful for this bass line, it's also worth having a look, just as we did with the arpeggio, having a look at the notes below that root there on the A string. So if we have a look at the scale again, we can take those notes, the descending notes there, that pattern, and then just play it from that E. Okay, so it's exactly the same pattern there. We're just playing it from that E there on the A string, and then also finish off with the F sharp and the E. So I'll run through the notes anyway. So if we start at that E there, we've got the notes D, 5th fret, and C sharp, 4th fret, both on the A string. Then we have the notes B, A, G sharp, so that's 7th fret, 5th fret, and 4th fret on the E string, and then we have the F sharp, 2nd fret of the E string, and then finally the open E. So that gives us a lot to play with there. So if we were to play down from the top, we can use the 1st finger there to catch the D, slide down to the C sharp, then we play the B, A, G sharp, F sharp, and then E. Okay, so let's try playing that from the bottom, so from the open E. So we can play the A, F sharp, then slide up to the G sharp, come up through the G sharp, A, B. Then we can play the C sharp there and the D, then the E with the 4th finger, slide up to the F sharp, and then all the way to the top, and then the same coming down, but this time we slide with the 1st finger. So I'm sliding up with the 4th finger, and then I'm sliding down with the 1st finger, and all of this is written there in the lesson material. Okay, so one more time through the scale. Okay. So now we have quite a few notes to play with. We have the arpeggio and we have the scale. But how do we incorporate those scale notes? As I showed in the previous lesson, it's fairly easy to use the chord tones because There's only 4 of them, and one of them's the root note. All of the chord tones work over the chord because they're actually in the chord. But the scale notes can be a little more tricky to use. You don't want to just start putting them in there randomly on a bass line because you might run into trouble. To use them properly, we need to take a closer look. So the first thing to be aware of is the fact that the scale is made up of 7 different notes, but only 3 of those notes are non-chord tones, so they don't appear in the arpeggio. So if you think about it, we've got 4 notes in the chord, the E7 arpeggio. We've got the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7th, as the separate different notes. And that's 4 notes, so out of 7 notes, we've only got 3 remaining. And those notes are the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th. So they are non-chord tones. So if we work up through the E Mixolydian again, we've got the root note, that's in the chord, so that's the root note. Then we've got the 2nd, non-chord tone, 3rd, chord tone, it's in the arpeggio, 4th, non-chord tone, 5th, chord tone, it's in the arpeggio, 6th, non-chord tone, 7th, that's in the arpeggio, that's a chord tone, and then we're at the top, okay? So it just alternates between chord tones and non-chord tones. And like I said, only the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th are outside of that arpeggio, okay? So the 2nd, the F sharp, the A there, the 4th, and the C sharp, the 6th, they're the non-chord tones. So, when we talk about adding scale notes into the mix, we're only actually talking exclusively about the 2nd, 4th, and 6th degrees of the scale. The root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th are notes of the arpeggio, the chord tones. So this is really, really important to understand because those non-chord tones are dissonances and they'll rub up against the notes of the chord, which causes tension. So we don't want to linger too long on them. If we do, then things are going to sound a little odd. So the first big tip is to be careful with the 2nd, 4th, and 6th degrees. You want to use those in passing. Now, obviously, you can use these non-chord tones to create tension and hold on to them for that effect if you want to, but you should be in control of that. You don't want to randomly land on something like a 4th without thinking and then find yourself having to move to a nearby chord tone as a kind of get out of jail free card. So one way of using these non-chord tones is to see them in terms of melodic devices. Now, I've already covered these melodic devices in a previous lesson, so I'll link to that in the info below, but needless to say, melodic devices might be something like a passing note, where we pass from one chord to the next, or we might use an approach note, where we simply move into a chord tone from out of nowhere. So the bass line I've got for you incorporates each of these 3 non-chord tones, the 2nd, 4th, and 6th degrees, and shows how you can use them as individual notes in there for their own flavour. When you think of using scales, don't just fall into the trap of thinking that you have to play a full scale like this, or even sections of it. That's not how you use scales in music. I mean, you can use them like that, but the majority of bass lines will use those individual notes in there, for their own flavour. So let's work through that bass line. So the first bar is going to sound like this. Okay, so we have open E string twice, first note held long, second note short. Just cut that off with the fretting hand there, and then we have C sharp to D. Okay, so this is 4th fret to 5th fret on the A string. I'm also putting a little ghost note in there just before the C sharp. Okay, so I cut the note off, cut off the E, play the ghost note, which I'm actually playing on the E string, and then C sharp, D, okay? And that's the first bar. So just play that round and round. In terms of the timing, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that first line just by itself is a really good example of how we can use scale notes to approach these chord tones. So there we have the C sharp to the D, that's the 6th to the flat and 7th, okay, so the 6th to the 7th of the scale. And if you can't see it too easily down there, just work up through the Mixolydian scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the 7th there. Okay, so that's that C sharp to the D, and we've just taken it down the octave. Okay, so it doesn't matter where we play that C sharp to the D, even if we played it up there, it's still the sixth and seventh of degrees of that scale. So we've just played it down here. So that's the 6th to the 7th, and it's a really popular line. You get it in lots of different funk lines, and you'll hear it in a lot of slap lines. You know, there it is. So that might be really familiar to you. If not, then, you know, it's a new sound that you can put there into your musical vocabulary, up there in the mental toolbox. The next line sounds like this. So we have open E string again, twice, just as we did in the first bar. Long, then short. Then we have E, 7th fret of the A string, up to the F sharp, 9th fret of the A string, and then down to the D, 5th fret of the A string. And you can put a little ghost note in again before the high E. In terms of a fingering, it's probably easiest to play the E with the first finger, F sharp with the 4th finger, and then the D there with the 1st finger. Okay, so I'm just playing up there with the hand there, and then just shifting position down to play the D with the 1st finger. So. So this line makes use of the 2nd in there, so non-chord tone. So we have root note, 2nd, and then down to that flattened 7th. Okay, and again, there's not enough time to linger. You know, we're not lingering on the 2nd there. There's not enough time for the tension to take effect, really. We're just going in there for some flavour and then dropping down. So the whole line is moving down from the E down to the D, but we've got this little hook up into the F sharp before we come down, okay? So that just gives us enough time to get that little bit of flavour there from that 2nd. Now let's put those two lines together. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you can just work round and round on those two lines until you get them under your fingers. The 3rd bar is exactly the same as the 1st bar. Then the 4th bar sounds like this. Okay, so the notes there are open E string, then we have G sharp, 4th fret of the E string, A, 5th fret of the E string, and then B, 7th fret of the E string. We play the B twice, then we move up to the D, 5th fret of the A string, and E, 7th fret of the A string. So all together. Okay, so there's a few ghost notes in there. We've got a ghost note before the G sharp. Actually, once on the G sharp there. Then a ghost note between the A and the B. So before the double B there, we have a ghost note. Okay? And then simply the D and the E. So very slowly. Okay, and that's that 4th bar. So that line makes use of the 4th degree of the scale. So we have root note for the open E, then we've got the 3rd, so that's a chord tone, then we use the 4th to lead from the 3rd to the 5th. Okay, so the A there, the 5th fret of the E string, that's the 4th degree of the scale. So if we were up here, 3, 4, 5, we're just playing it down there, so we have. Okay, so we're just passing between the 3rd and the 5th, and then we're up to the flat 7 and the octave again. So even though there's quite a few notes in that line, it's all chord tones apart from that A there, which is just the passing note, the 4th there. So that's why I say that when we use the scales, there are only 3 notes in there that are non-chord tone based. So when it's you're differentiating between let's say an arpeggio, the chord tones, and scales, thinking, oh, scales have got a lot of notes, arpeggios don't. That's actually not true. Scales have only got 3 notes extra compared to a 7th arpeggio. So let's put all those lines together and play round and round. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so just go round and round and round until you've got it under your fingers and you can build up some speed. Now let's try it with the drum track. So that's a simple example of how we can use scale notes or non-chord tones in a bass line. For any chord, there's going to be a standard common diatonic scale that works most of the time. For a major 7 chord, we're looking at a major scale or a Lydian scale, and a minor 7 chord is going to be a Dorian scale. But as I'll be showing in another upcoming lesson, when we bring chromatic notes into the mix, you begin to realise that thinking about scales and modes all the time can be a little limiting. The main focus should be on the chord tone arpeggio framework, and then anything else around those key notes can be seen as non-chord tones, whether it's from a popular scale or not. So remember to like this video if it's helped, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also check out TalkingBass.net for more videos and bass goodies. Okay, I'll see you later.